What follows is from a website written by a friend of Kristen Charbonneau's family as well as from the Charlie Project. Names have been changed because I wanted to make videos, not deal with legal BS. If you'd like to know the real names of the accused and his associates, please visit the actual websites. The links to them are in the description box below. This is the description of Kristen Charbonneau's disappearance according to her Charlie Project page. Charbonneau was last seen leaving the Baby Dolls strip club on the far east side of Fort Worth, Texas at approximately 3:41 p.m. on August 11, 2005. She was employed at the club as a dancer. Witnesses at the strip club stated she stumbled and fell down, as if she was under the influence, although it has not been established that she had actually drunk alcohol or taken drugs on the day of her disappearance. She had a history of drinking at work and getting too drunk to drive home. The management would call her a cab. When Charbonneau left Baby Dolls on the afternoon she disappeared, a customer, DM, walked her to the door and carried her purse. By the time her taxi arrived to pick her up, she wasn't there. She has never been heard from again. Her dog and all her personal belongings were left behind. Charbonneau attended Denton Ryan High School in Denton, Texas, but did not graduate. She dropped out of school and got her GED instead. She had been working at the strip club for 5 years prior to her disappearance. She has a criminal history for driving while intoxicated. Charbonneau resided with her boyfriend in Euless, Texas in 2005. That city's police are investigating her disappearance. The week before her disappearance, she told her mother and said she and her boyfriend were going to marry and move to Wichita Falls, Texas. It was her boyfriend who reported her missing. Charbonneau paid for all her purchases with cash and did not have a bank account, credit cards or a cellular phone, making her difficult to track. Police initially believed she had left of her own accord and didn't thoroughly investigate the case, but they later concluded that foul play was involved. Charbonneau's family long suspected DM, a married car salesman and the father of 2 children, was involved in her disappearance. They posted flyers in his hometown of Arlington, Texas, as well as on the internet, accusing him of killing her. A photograph of DM is posted with this case summary. He was a regular customer at Baby Dolls. In February 2010, he was arrested and charged with Charbonneau's murder. DM had been having an affair and, when his girlfriend saw the flyers that claimed he was involved in Charbonneau's disappearance, she confronted him about it. He allegedly told her he had accidentally killed Charbonneau. She told a friend, who went to the police in January 2010. When authorities questioned DM's girlfriend, she confirmed the account about his confession. Police searched a Kennedale, Texas house which belonged to a relative of DM's, and they found a bullet hole in the headboard of a bed and a stain on the mattress that resembled blood. They were unable to obtain DNA from the stain for testing, however. It wasn't until December 2010 that the police presented their case to a grand jury. The jury declined to indict DM, however, so authorities had to drop the charges against him. They had been unable to confirm DM's girlfriend's story, and her statements had been a major part of the evidence against him. Authorities may attempt to bring the murder charge against DM again in the future, if more evidence resurfaces. Charbonneau is the oldest of 5 children in her family. One of her brothers died of cancer in childhood and another died in a motorcycle accident in 2008, 3 years after her disappearance, but her parents, sister and surviving brother are still alive and continue to search for her. Her case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected due to the circumstances involved. The next part is from a website on Kristen's case. Once again, names of the accused and his associates have been changed. The link to the actual website is in the description box below. Kristen Elizabeth Charbonneau was the first child of David and Monica, born on September 27, 1980. She welcomed her first brother, Dustin, into her heart on August 1, 1982. A little over a year later, on December 22, 1983 she had another brother, Joey, to love. Kristen looked after them as if they were her own children. She was somewhat of a tomboy but loved dressing up just the same. In August 1987 Dustin was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. Kristen was young and didn't really understand the seriousness of that diagnosis, but when Dustin died on September 22, 1987 she had to face the loss of her first brother. At the same time Monica was pregnant with Alicia, Kristen's first and only sister. On October 29, 1987, only a month after Dustin died, Kristen finally got a sister, and it was a special bond no one else would ever get close to. Kristen took care of Alicia and taught her all the important things she needed to know. For many years the siblings were Kristen, Joey, and Alicia. Joey naturally protected his sisters, and if you hurt one of them, you had to answer to Joey. An ex-boyfriend of Alicia can tell you what that was like, as he answered to Joey and David for the mistreatment he had shown Alicia. On August 16, 1996 David and Monica became new parents again. They welcomed Brandon David into their family and he became everyone's bubba. Brandon was raised by the whole family and he had the unique opportunity to have brothers and sisters that were old enough to bring him to all the fun places in the area. They all attended his school functions, yelling his name. It wasn't unusual for Kristen to walk up to the school and have lunch with Brandon a couple times a week. Kristen was not just a dancer at a club who disappeared. She was a daughter, a sister and a friend. She was an adult but had a heart of a child. Kristen would have rather stayed a young teenager living at home. She struggled with life and the world the way it was. She was so naive it was funny. She was loyal to her family and very close to her brothers and sister. She did not tolerate abuse against herself or anyone else. When Kristen disappeared on August 11, 2005, the family knew something was terribly wrong for a couple of reasons. Alicia was staying with Kristen that week and Kristen looked forward to going home, cooking dinner and watching TV. Kristen's boyfriend worked out of town during the week and Kristen didn't like staying by herself in the big home. As the days went by they began to panic but held hope that Kristen would be there on the 16th, Brandon's 9th birthday. Monica and Kristen had decided to get Brandon a drum set and were planning to go shopping on Saturday. When she didn't come for his birthday, that was the deciding factor that there was foul play. The Charbonneau family found it impossible to describe the roller coaster ride since that fateful day. There are no manuals that can prepare a family for this tragedy. They had suffered the loss of a child but this was different. They did not know what had happened to Kristen. The questions of how, when, where and why could not be answered. They have spent years searching for her knowing that the answers they desperately seek are hidden in one person, a person that refuses to admit the truth. Kristen's father David and brother Joey were emotionally torn between seeking justice for Kristen and obeying the law of man and God. The family could not survive the loss of either one by a life sentence for doing what they believed was justified. In a twisted way, this killer got lucky that the Charbonneaus have morals and values, traits the killer of Kristen doesn't have. It's a daily struggle and who's to say if one day something changes in their hearts. Joey struggled with his desire to avenge his sister's murder and his own feelings of guilt for not being there for his sister. Of course none of them could have prevented this murder but Joey had lost his older brother and sister. Joey was not one to mince words and if you challenged him he would take you down in a heartbeat. And he would have done the same to DM if given the opportunity. Joey had experienced many setbacks in his young life but his family stood by him. David and Monica described it as they saved Joey from himself more than he did. They did this because they knew Joey's heart was good. In 2007 Joey's life turned around, he held down a full-time job, was Employee of the Month, was dating a young lady that he had planned to marry and was staying out of trouble. Sadly, on May 17, 2008 Joey was killed in a motorcycle accident. This loss devastated the Charbonneau family. How could this be that they lost Dustin, Kristen and Joey? After Joey's memorial service they spoke with a lady at the funeral home who counseled them and said that Joey suffered from survivor's guilt. Joey had survived so many things in life that he felt he should be the one to die, not Dustin or Kristen. He had cheated death many times, he had been in a lot of trouble and didn't always value his own life. His guilt for surviving, not being able to find Kristen and resisting his natural instinct to go after Kristen's killer had eaten away at him. The death of Joey made the Charbonneau family step up their efforts to find justice for Kristen. They began a campaign that would eventually lead to the arrest of DM. A reporter described it as a witch hunt and others believed it was unfair to target someone who had not been convicted and was still considered innocent. But there were also a large group of people who cheered them on, encouraged them to keep the pursuit going and swore they would do the same if it had been them. The Charbonneau family promised that the person who took Kristen's life was not going to live his life as if nothing had happened and that is just what they did. This website, themurderofkristencharbonneau.com, was created to document the truth behind Kristen's disappearance and to tell the story of the Charbonneau's journey for justice. It is vital for all readers to know the information contained on this website was taken from the ULSPD case file for Kristen Charbonneau. The Charbonneaus have shared the information about their pursuit of DM with the creator of this website. Kristen was a dancer at Baby Dolls Club on Highway 157. This location is on the border of Euless featuring Worth. Kristen worked the day shift from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Kristen did not have a car and traveled to and from work by cab. She left her home at around 11:30 a.m. and never returned. The customer, we will refer to him here as DM. It took a long time for the truth to finally be told about what really happened on August 11, 2005, the last day Kristen was ever seen. Her case was investigated by two teams of detectives, one team when she disappeared and another team when Chief Brown ordered a new investigation. DM entered the club that afternoon and was approached by a waitress asking if there was anything she could get him. He said he was waiting for Devin, Kristen's stage name. Kristen was seen sitting at DM's table. Kristen got into an argument with one of the managers and was told to go home early as she appeared to be unstable. Kristen left DM's table and went to the back to get dressed while the manager called her a cab. The manager, who we will refer to as Alan, told the family and the police that the cab's automated call was received. Another manager, who we will refer to as Tim, went to the back to get Kristen, walked her to the door and saw the cab outside. That proved to be a lie. Another dancer walked with Kristen to the door, carrying her bag. DM appeared at the door, took Kristen's bag and walked out behind her. DM walked his tab but left a motel key and his business card on his table. The lady at the front door was questioned if DM had left without paying and she confirmed he had left. She had DM's cell phone number because they had talked about going out. She called DM several times but he didn't answer. She also received the automated call from the cab company announcing they were close to the club. She had seen Kristen walk out the door and expected the cab would pick her up and didn't think any more about it. She received another call from the cab driver saying he was outside but no one was there. She told the cab driver that Kristen had walked outside. The cab driver waited a few minutes, registered a no fare and left. The lady went outside, Kristen was gone and so was the cab. About 2 to 3 hours later DM returned to the club. The lady at the front asked DM if he had seen Kristen outside because the cab driver said she wasn't outside. He said he gave Kristen a ride. She also told DM she had been trying to call him because he didn't pay his tab and he didn't answer his phone. He said he was working on his boat. He did not tell her that he had lost his cell phone at the car auction, which was his story to the detectives. DM stayed for a while and began drinking shots, appeared to be in a bad mood and not the same as he was before he left. During the second investigation, the dancer that walked with Kristen to the door was contacted for an interview. She refused to come to the police station because she was scared of DM. The police agreed to meet her at a local gas station. They arrived a little early and waited for her. She arrived with a male friend and was extremely nervous. The detectives asked her why she was so scared. She explained that after her first interview with the police where she identified DM in a lineup of pictures, DM began to follow her from one club to another. He wouldn't speak to her or approach her, he would sit at a table and stare at her. She quit die-making because of this incident. After the second investigation was completed, the detectives reported that they believed, based on all the interviews with the witnesses at the club that day, that DM followed Kristen out of the club on August 11, 2005 and he was responsible for her disappearance. On the 4th-year anniversary of Kristen's disappearance, the detectives conceded that Kristen had been murdered. The first conversation with DM by Euless detectives was by phone and DM said he was at the club that day but didn't know Kristen and had no knowledge of her. He said he remembered a lady sitting at the next table being scolded by the manager. He said he got up to go to the bathroom and as he was returning he realized he was missing his cell phone. He thought he may have laid it on the hood or trunk of his car. It fell off and was possibly in the street. He stated that he left to look for his cell phone and the same lady, about 20 with brown long wavy hair, walked out in front of him. He said something like having a bad day and left. He stated that he did not see a cab at the club. He stated he was only gone for about 20 minutes and when he returned Kristen was still waiting outside. He said she was standing in front of the club with her bag at her feet. He said that there was a blue or silver car nearby, however he did not know who was in the car or if they were talking to Kristen. He said he went back into the club and that was the last time he saw her. About a month later the detectives talked to the dancer who walked with Kristen to the door. She picked DM out of a lineup and identified him as the customer who took Kristen's bag from her and walked out behind Kristen. She said at first she thought he was the cab driver because there were times when the cab driver would come inside the club to wait for Kristen. She said she thought about walking outside but club rules prohibit a dancer from walking outside while working. Armed with DM being picked out of a lineup, the detectives began contacting DM again for further questioning. The detective left numerous voice messages on DM's cell phone and left business cards on his front door. He finally returned the call and agreed to come in for more questioning but said he was very busy. The detective continued to call and leave messages. He changed his message on his cell phone in a woman's voice saying he would be unavailable for the next 3 weeks. The detective continued to leave messages until the voicemail box was full. In December the detective was finally able to leave a message and told DM he was in the process of obtaining a subpoena from the grand jury for him to appear to answer questions about Kristen's disappearance. On December 12, 2005 DM showed up at the Euless PD without calling or making an appointment. He said he realized he lost his cell phone, left to go look for it. He said when he returned Kristen was gone. The detective pointed out that DM's story had changed from the first one. DM began getting very nervous, showing signs of deception. He was asked if his wife knew he was going to strip clubs and he became very uneasy and said she would be upset because it's not in the contract. He was offered a polygraph so if he was telling the truth, he could be cleared. He refused, saying he had nothing to gain by taking it. The detective told him he would have to contact his wife and DM said he would tell her he would be contacting her. Said he had to leave and left the station. The detective left numerous messages on DM's cell phone asking if he had told his wife about the incident. The detective left several business cards on their front door. DM never returned the calls or answered when he called. Has refused to answer any more questions and never agreed to take the polygraph so he could prove he was telling the truth and was not involved with Kristen's disappearance. It is important to note that several people who were interviewed offered to take a polygraph or if asked, agreed to take it. The only person who refused to take the polygraph was DM. The only person who has refused to answer any more questions is DM. The same people who were interviewed in 2005, were interviewed again in 2009. All of them came into the police station or welcomed the detectives into their home. All of their stories remained the same from the first interview. The only person who refused to be questioned again is DM. The only person whose answers were different from their first interview was DM. The detective meets with DM's wife, who we will refer to here as Kay. The detective told DM if he didn't take the polygraph he would notify DM's wife, Kay, about Kristen's disappearance and about DM's interviews with the detectives. The detective left several business cards on his front door but he never got a call from Kay. One day the detective went to the home and found Kay at home. He asked her if she had received his business card and she said yes, but DM had told her it was taken care of. The detective told Kay why he was questioning DM and she was quote-unquote shocked that DM was at a topless club. He showed Kay a picture of Kristen and explained that her husband was the last person to be seen with Kristen and that his account of that day had changed from the first interview to the second interview. Kay confirmed the type of car DM was driving that day and that she didn't notice anything about DM that was off. She was told the arrangement that if DM had taken the polygraph he would not have told her about this. She stated that DM had not told her anything about this and did not approve of DM going to clubs like this. DM had stated in his second interview that Kay would not approve of him going to the clubs because quote it wasn't in the contract unquote. While the detective and Kay were speaking, DM came home. The detective said DM lost all the color in his face when he saw him in his home talking to Kay and began stuttering. He asked why he was there and the detective reminded DM of their arrangement. DM did not say another word, but went into another room and slammed the door. The detective asked Kay if there were any weapons in the house. She said no and asked the detective to leave so she could speak to her husband. The detective gave her his card and asked her to call if she wanted to watch DM's interview with the police. That same night DM left a message on the detective's phone to never come to his home again and leave his wife alone. This was the last time DM talked to the detectives. The family's pursuit of the truth. David, Monica and family have carried out their own mission for the truth of what happened to Kristen. They decided to pursue DM and expose him. This was done in an effort to seek the truth from DM. The Euless PD did not condone their methods or assist them in finding DM. This was a decision they made. For Kristen, finding DM was rather easy since they had his criminal records. Mugshots are public information and it didn't take long to locate him. They received several mugshots of DM but one stood out. He was arrested approximately 1 month after Kristen disappeared. They now had a picture of what DM looked like on August 11, 2005. The Charbonneau family had made the decision to give DM an opportunity to contact them before they contacted anyone else or posted flyers. They had a small hope that DM may decide to take the polygraph so his name could be cleared and if he was telling the truth, they could continue the search for the person responsible for Kristen's disappearance. They sent DM a letter to his home address explaining who they were, how they learned of who he was and what they wanted, the truth. They asked him to take a polygraph or at the least, answer the questions the police had asked. Why was his story different? Why wouldn't he take the polygraph that others had agreed to take if necessary? Why did he take Kristen's bag from the other dancer and then deny it? Why did he lie about knowing Kristen? Why did he tell the lady he had given Kristen a ride? If he didn't want his wife to know about this matter, then why did he allow her to be notified? The first letter was never answered. They sent a second letter advising DM if he did not respond to their request, they would begin notifying his wife, family, friends and neighbors. Knowing that an innocent person would not want these steps to be taken, they expected some kind of action from DM. If he didn't notify the Euless PD they expected him to contact the police and make a complaint. That didn't happen but something interesting did. David Charbonneau began looking at MySpace, which at the time was the social network that Facebook is now. They knew Kristen had an account with MySpace so they wondered if DM had contacted her through this account. David began a search of DMs in the Arlington area and there was a faceless member. He had described himself as a single man. David decided to send this faceless single man a message. The message was to the tune of, "I am Kristen's father, and if you are the DM that killed my daughter." A few days later, the Euless detective got a message from the Arlington PD explaining that DM had called him concerned with a message he received from David Charbonneau through MySpace. He felt threatened by the message and was concerned for his family. Out of curiosity, the detective asked DM why he had a MySpace page, and he said he liked to meet women but it was only as friendships. The detective told DM to come to the police station and make a written complaint so he could contact the Charbonneau family and insist they stop contacting him. DM never came into the police station. The Charbonneau family sent DM 2 more letters, each time giving him more time to consider their request to answer the questions and take the polygraph. They made it clear that if he didn't do either, they would contact his wife. DM responded. He changed his mailing address to a P.O. box. The Charbonneau family does not know if Kay ever read any of the letters or if DM changed to a P.O. box before she got one, but they do know that a friend close to DM found a flyer in DM's car one day. His friend asked him what it was about and he said it was bogus. His friend saw another flyer in his car a few weeks later. He asked DM again and he said it was nothing. His friend said he knew DM was hiding it from Kay. It is revealing to tell an interesting story about an innocent man with the same name as DM. The first DM that was contacted by the Charbonneau family was in fact, an innocent man. He went directly to the police when he got the first letter. He said he was not involved in this case and wanted his name cleared. The detective spoke with Euless and confirmed that this DM was not the DM at the club that day. The Charbonneau family was contacted and told that they had selected the wrong DM. The DM from the club did not react like this at all. He ignored the letters. He hid them away so Kay wouldn't find them. He didn't expect the Charbonneau family would carry out their plan. He was wrong. Neighbors and family are contacted, because DM did not respond to the Charbonneau's request for him to take the polygraph and answer the questions the police were asking. They did exactly what they said they would do, begin contacting the neighbors where DM lived. There are approximately 6 streets in their subdivision. The street DM lived on received the first letters. At that time the website had not been created, so they designed a short letter with Kristen and DM's picture. The letter stated that DM was the last person to see Kristen. He had refused to be interviewed for several months and that when he finally had no choice but to be interviewed, his story changed. He showed all the signs of deception and terminated the interview when he was asked if he would take a polygraph. The Charbonneau's letter was not intended to do anything more than force DM to answer the questions honestly and take the polygraph. They believed that if DM was truly innocent, he would want to clear his name. They sent a copy of the letter to DM to show him that they were serious. The following week another letter was sent to a different street in the subdivision and DM was notified what addresses had been mailed a letter that week. About a week later the Charbonneaus noticed a strange truck parked across the street from their home. Monica got home and noticed a man sitting in the truck. She picked Brandon up and went to the store. The truck followed. They took down the plate hash and ran it through a public website where you can look up vehicle information. It was traced to a man in Arlington. David found the phone number and called. A lady answered the phone and was asked why a truck registered to a man with her last name would be parked across the street from their home. She said, yes, he is a PI for a local attorney and is working on a case in Irving. David asked her to have her husband call him when he got home. The man called but wouldn't give any information. He was informed to not return to the Charbonneau home. About 2 days later the Charbonneaus received a letter from Mr. Hansen, an attorney representing DM. The letter stated that DM would file a civil suit against the Charbonneaus if they continued sending letters accusing DM of murdering their daughter. Of course, he said DM is not involved in their daughter's case. The Charbonneaus were not intimidated and called the attorney. He confirmed that his client was the same DM that was questioned by Euless PD. They also informed Mr. Hansen that the letters would continue and if DM wanted to file suit, they would welcome him in a courtroom. The attorney said nothing but thanked them for calling. The only comment Mr. Hansen would give to the local newspaper was that the Charbonneaus didn't have any assets, so it wouldn't do any good to sue them. Did he not think that suing the Charbonneau family would stop them from sending letters, which is what DM wanted to begin with? It was just another excuse why DM didn't follow through with his threat of a lawsuit. The reason DM didn't follow through with his threat of suing the Charbonneau family is because he would have to answer questions about Kristen's disappearances in a courtroom and he was not going to do that. It had nothing to do with the Charbonneaus not having any money. Other than this bogus threat of a lawsuit, DM made no attempt to stop the Charbonneaus' efforts to expose him. Once they had sent letters to all his neighbors in his subdivision, they began sending letters outside of their neighborhood. They also began sending letters to local businesses. Monica and Alicia handed out flyers every weekend in the Arlington area. They also had yard signs made that said DM murdered Kristen Charbonneau, he would not remain free much longer. The signs were posted all over Arlington and in Euless. Through Monica's research she located Kay's twin sister and brother. She also found DM's sister and mother and talked to his mother's husband who was not fond of DM. Through conversations with other people Monica discovered that Kay was a teacher at an elementary school. She sent Kay a letter and also notified everyone with the school district who DM was and what he was suspected of doing. The Charbonneau family had done exactly what they said they would do, and through it all, DM did absolutely nothing to stop the letters, flyers and accusations. Is that the actions of an innocent person? Is this what an innocent husband and father would allow their family to suffer through? Would an innocent husband allow their wife's employer to be contacted? Would an innocent father allow their son's friends to be told their father is involved in a young woman's disappearance? Would an innocent man allow his entire family to be contacted? The Charbonneau family challenged DM and he did nothing. The website is published. In July 2008, after the death of Joey, David Charbonneau came up with the idea of creating a website for Kristen. The website's purpose was to generate leads, find witnesses and bring awareness to Kristen's disappearance. They knew if they were going to find someone who could help they had to show Kristen and DM's pictures. Website announcements were mailed to thousands of residents and businesses in the Arlington and Euless area. With the help of Charbonneau supporters, the website visitors began to grow. There were fierce supporters of the website and there were strong opponents against it. Some people complained about the website announcement they received and expressed that through the guestbook. There were others that blamed Kristen for her own murder because of where she worked. Some blamed the Charbonneau family, saying they were not good parents. They stated that in this world there will always be those that blame the victim. They understood from the beginning that not everyone was going to agree, but such is life. They said if they didn't agree with the website, then don't read it. Monica remembers one comment that has stood out through the years, and it was directed towards David. A man posted a comment saying, "For a father to be able to resist his instinct to avenge his daughter's murder is not only commendable, but it sets a bar of respect and dignity that few men could reach." The website visitor count grew each day and the information was reaching people who knew Kristen and had dealings with DM. Several dancers who knew DM contacted the Charbonneau family. Their strength grew with each person who joined their journey for the truth. The witness. In the later part of 2009, a woman walked into the Euless PD and said she had information about the Kristen Charbonneau case. The Charbonneau family has asked that we not reveal her name because she has never given permission and she did what others may not have done. She told the police that her friend had information about Kristen's case, information that is a confession from DM himself admitting that he killed Kristen. She told the police she had known DM for a long time, and although she believes that DM killed Kristen, she doesn't believe he planned to kill her. She said DM is not evil, he may be an asshole, a liar and a cheat, but she believes, based on her knowledge of DM, that he made sexual advances towards Kristen. She refused and it went bad from there. The witness believed her friend wanted to come forward but didn't want to be the one who turned DM in. So she decided to get the ball rolling. She gave her statement, lead the police to a mobile home in Kennedale. A mobile home that DM's aunt owns and is being used to house and take care of DM's mistress. This witness did what many others may not have done. She risked her and her family's privacy. She knew information that was vital to solving this case and she stood for what was right as she was a mother herself. The Charbonneau family thanks her for her honesty and for doing the right thing. The mistress, who we will refer to here as Casey, which is not her real name. The detectives get a search warrant for the mobile home and knock on the door. A child answers with a chilling question, a question Monica has asked that we not reveal on this website. Casey is confronted with the detectives and allows them to come into the trailer and search it. She knows why they are there. Casey explains that she has known DM since high school and they have always had a connection. They met up recently at a high school reunion and she was sad to hear that DM was married. A couple of months after the reunion she receives a message on Facebook, "It's DM." She immediately calls him and he returns her call while she is at a pawn shop trying to get the money to pay for her motel. Her and her children have been living in a motel for several months. DM tells her to meet him and she does. He gives her money and tells her if she is with him her life will improve. He told her he is divorcing his wife and moving out. DM promises her he will get her out of the motel room but continues to pay her weekly motel bill until he can find a place for her. That promise goes on for too long. The motel room is due again and Casey doesn't have the money. She is panicked and begins calling DM. She is in tears because she doesn't have the money for the motel and DM hasn't found a place for her to live. He eventually calls her back and saves the day. He brings her to his aunt's mobile home and moves her in. She is told not to talk to any of the neighbors but Casey knows DM's aunt and they meet very quickly. The aunt told the police DM was just helping Casey as a friend. Casey and DM continue their affair and he promises her they will be together. He manages to buy her children's school uniforms, gets them registered in school, pays all the bills, buys Casey a cell phone, a car and opens a checking account for her. He also gets her registered in school. He brings Casey to the doctor so she can get on birth control, but it's too late. Casey is pregnant. DM makes it very clear he doesn't want any more children and Casey agrees she doesn't either. DM finances Casey's abortion. DM has used this mobile home for his makeshift office, so Casey starts looking in the files and runs across one labeled Stalker Family. DM has kept all the letters the Charbonneau family has sent him and she sees one with a website address. She reads the website and is shocked. She begins talking to her friends about what she has learned and they tell her to get away from him. One friend said he would stop being her friend if she stayed with DM. DM comes over one day complaining to Casey about what her friends are telling her. She confronts DM and asks for the truth about what happened. He breaks down into tears and admits that he killed Kristen but says it was an accident. He tells a story of Kristen attacking him in the parking lot and cutting him with a nail file. He elbows her in the temple and kills her. He said it was the worst day of his life. Casey said the only time she has seen DM cry was when his father died, and as he tells the story about Kristen. Casey asked him where Kristen's body is but he refuses to tell her, only that she will never be found. Casey starts conducting her own investigation. She takes pictures of a hole in the wall, blood on the mattress and saves the vacuum cleaner bag that was there when she moved in. She begins believing Kristen's ghost is in the trailer and starts talking to her, asking her to show her where she is. Casey starts keeping a diary of what happens each day so she can keep everything straight. She is concerned with a terrible smell coming from under the trailer and asks DM about it. He said there is a sewer leak under the trailer and a plumber will be coming out to fix it and put lime under the trailer. She asks DM about the lime because of her daughter's allergies. He said it is safe and will cover any smell, including human decay. This is the point where she begins believing Kristen is buried under the trailer. She also shares this information with her children. Casey gives a voluntary statement to the detectives and also gives them a sample she cut from the mattress and the vacuum cleaner bag. She shows them the hole in the wall and the remaining blood on the mattress. DM quickly learns from his aunt that the detectives are at the trailer and calls Casey. He tells her she doesn't have to talk to them, take a pill, shut up and get it together. DM knows that he will soon be arrested and that the police may have bugged the trailer in listening to their cell phone calls. He will not talk to her on the phone, and when he comes over to the trailer they pass notes back and forth. There are no notes in the case file to indicate the trailer was bugged or their phone calls were monitored, but DM is not taking any chances. Casey describes an incident that took place before the detectives were told anything that is chilling. It cannot be made a part of this website. Casey has no idea that her life is going to change. In February 2010, almost 5 years after Kristen disappeared, DM was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. That charge validated that DM had killed Kristen and she definitely would not be coming home. As much as the Charbonneau family knew that DM was responsible for Kristen's death, they had that little ray of hope that she was still alive. With his arrest, that small little light at the end of the tunnel was now completely dark. There was no more hope that she was alive. In researching to write this page, I read through the arrest records and the information that Monica had received in Kristen's case file, and there was some indication that DM knew he would eventually be arrested. He already knew the detectives had found the mobile home and questioned Casey. It was just a matter of time. DM was arrested through a traffic stop and hauled off to the Euless police station. Kim, one of the detectives that worked on Kristen's case, had become good friends with Monica and her family, and she despised DM. She said she didn't want to be there when he was arrested because she didn't want to have to touch DM. From closely looking at his mugshot, you can see a lump and redness right under his hairline on the right. Maybe the police accidentally bumped his head when placing him in the back seat of the police car. Although Kim didn't get to witness DM's arrest, she did have the pleasure of knocking on DM's front door to inform Kay that her husband had been arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Kay has never given an interview about this case but did tell the detectives Monica had embarrassed her at the school and had spoken lies about the day DM walked into her home and found Detective Skiles questioning her. I can't imagine what she felt when she was told her husband had been arrested, but I am sure she panicked. She also had to hear the truth about Casey and her relationship with her husband. Hear the truth about Casey and her relationship with her husband. Hear the truth about Casey and her relationship with her husband. Hear the truth about Casey and her relationship with her husband. Hear the truth about. Records provided by Monica confirm that DM had intended to bring Kay to the mobile home and introduce her to Casey. Casey was told to be on her best behavior and Kay was to be told that she was a friend from high school who had children and needed a place to live. There are no reports confirming that introduction ever happened. Through DM's arrest she learned DM and Casey had been having an affair. He had been providing her and her children with everything they needed. She also learned that DM paid for Casey's abortion when DM got her pregnant. Why Kay chose to stay with DM is beyond anyone's understanding. Everyone was wondering what was wrong with her more than what was wrong with DM. DM had the best of both worlds. Kay provided steady income through her employment with the school district. She maintained a good credit rating. The home was being paid by her and DM was allowed to roam the streets and clubs during the day, steal money from folks that were being scammed by another one of DM's money-making ideas. From all reports DM cooked and cleaned and Kay was happy with their lifestyle. DM refused to speak to the detectives after his arrest but was extremely nervous. He knew he didn't have to speak a word and he didn't. Which didn't surprise anyone. It was quite upsetting that his bail was only $35,000 but the low amount was for a good reason and the Charbonneau family understood that. Records show that the bail was not 10%, it was for quite a bit more and Kay didn't have the cash. Our information shows that she had to borrow from friends and family in order to get her murdering husband out of jail. DM was mad that it cost so much but he wouldn't have cared how Kay had to get it, as long as she did. Funny that his first phone call wasn't to Kay, it was to Casey to see just how much she had told the police. DM had to plot this very carefully because he needed Kay and Casey for different reasons. If there was one thing DM was really good at, it's lying and using people for what he needs. DM was arrested on a Friday night and out of jail the next day. There's no way of knowing what he told Kay when they got home, but DM did find a way to get to the mobile home and talk to Casey. But they didn't speak, they exchanged notes because DM believed the mobile home was bugged. Why didn't DM speak openly if he was in fact innocent? He had a perfect opportunity to proclaim his innocence and be on tape, but instead he chose to remain silent and pass notes back and forth. Just another sign of his guilt. The night DM was arrested, the news media was on the story fast. They went to the mobile home and tried to interview Casey but she wouldn't speak. The Charbonneau family granted interviews with all the local news stations and expressed their satisfaction that DM was charged with Kristen's murder. But they knew this was just another step towards justice and they still had a long way to go. Information proves that DM did not look well after his arrest. He appeared to lose quite a bit of weight and looked tired. Kay and DM were seen at a local store in Arlington arm in arm. Kay must have felt like a hero to save her husband, again. And maybe she felt like DM had chosen her over Casey. Little did she know that DM had lied to her again. But Kay is not an innocent victim. She knows DM is an excellent liar and con. DM was with Kay because he needed her. Casey was made to move out of the trailer by DM's aunt. Casey was packing one day and DM's aunt came in and hollered at her, telling her all she needed to do was shut her mouth and everything would have been fine. She would still have a place to live. She blamed the whole incident on Casey and not the person who caused this whole tragedy. It just proves how much DM can manipulate people into believing he is the victim and everyone else is wrong. Although the Charbonneau family was happy that DM had been arrested for the murder of their daughter, they had to face reality. Kristen was in fact dead. They had lost their first son, Dustin, at the age of 5 to liver cancer in 1987, but there was closure and a time to say goodbye. In Kristen's death, there were no answers, no opportunity to say goodbye, no body to bury, no clear answers of how she died. They knew that only one person could provide the answers they needed but knew he would never speak. To be able to come to terms with this has not been easy and still not accomplished. The Charbonneau family told me it is a daily struggle to come to grips with the fact that Kristen was murdered and her body never found. To know that one person can give them the answers but won't and can't be made to is something they will never be able to accept. Justice was so close but yet so far away. It would take a very long time for this case to be heard by a grand jury. There are several facts about the meeting with Betty Arvin, DA of Tarrant County, and the grand jury hearing that cannot be revealed on this website. Because of this, we can't continue this chronological story. The investigation of Kristen's disappearance continues but can't be made a part of this website. Suffice it to say that the Charbonneau family has made sure that Kristen's case is not put on a shelf. Kristen will one day be found and DM will have to answer for what he chose to do on August 11, 2005. So, what do you believe happened to Kristen Charbonneau? Do you think the bullet in the headboard and bloody mattress are an indication someone was killed in that bed? Do you think DM is guilty? Post your theory in the comments below. If you liked this episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. This episode, please give